If you think you're living at the peak of human progress, think again. 2,000 years ago, a Roman could wake up in a multi-story apartment building, walk downstairs to wash their face with running water from a bronze tap, grab a quick bite at a street-side snack bar, hit the gym, and then relax in a bathhouse with heated floors. No, this isn't science fiction. This is ancient Rome. And the truth is, many of the technologies we pride ourselves on today were already invented, and in some cases perfected by the Romans. What's even crazier? We still haven't caught up in some areas. It all starts with the roads. Roman roads weren't just about travel, they were the lifelines of the empire. Roads meant armies, food, news, and power could flow across the continent. And Roman engineers didn't just throw down stones and call it a day. First, they dug deep trenches, carefully leveled the base and filled it with layers of crushed rock, gravel, sand, and lime. Then came basalt slabs, fitted together so precisely that some roads are still smooth enough to walk on today. The surface was slightly arched in the center to drain rainwater with side gutters and curbs. No GPS. No lasers. Just sheer skill. They built over 400,000 kilometers of roads, 80,000 of them fully paved, many still in use after 2,000 years. But roads were just the beginning. Roman legions weren't just soldiers. Each man carried a shovel, a hammer, stakes, rope, and even pieces of a tent. Every legionnaire was a walking construction unit. And here's the mind-blowing part. When 20,000 soldiers stopped to camp, they'd build a fully fortified military base, with moats, ramparts, towers, and latrines in under 4 hours. The next morning, they'd take it all down and march on. No other army in history operated with this level of speed and precision. And the Romans didn't just fight with swords, they engineered war. Ballistae, catapults, battering rams, siege towers. During the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, the Romans filled in a massive valley with earthworks in just 21 days, rolled up enormous siege towers, and crushed a city that was thought to be untouchable. These machines were like tanks made of timber, rolled to the walls under cover, unleashing troops and chaos. Roman warfare wasn't brute force, it was mechanical calculation. But let's go back to the city. Think skyscrapers are a modern invention? In central Rome, in the Esquiline district, stood insulae, apartment blocks up to 6 stories high. Shops on the ground floor, balconies, communal staircases, even plumbing in some buildings with running water piped up from underground. The rich lived on the lower floors, the poor at the top, under the roof where it was hot, cramped, and often dangerous. These buildings reached 20 meters tall, built with nothing but hand tools, timber, bricks, and a whole lot of math. Now about that concrete. Modern concrete cracks in 50 years. Roman concrete? It's still standing. Why? Because they used a volcanic ash mix called pozzolana, which reacts with seawater to strengthen over time. That's why Roman seaports and harbors are still structurally sound after 2 millennia. The Pantheon in Rome has the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever built, 43 meters in diameter, and it still hasn't collapsed. Modern engineers still study it. That's not luck. That's chemistry, physics, and a deep understanding of materials. And none of it was done with machines. No computers, no CAD. Just hands, geometry, and centuries of passed down knowledge. And if you thought Roman roads and concrete were impressive, just wait. Because the deeper you go into Roman life, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't some primitive world of togas and sandals. This was a machine in the shape of a civilization. Take their public baths, for example. You walk in, hand over a coin, and step into a massive complex. Marble columns, vaulted ceilings, natural light, mosaics underfoot. You could bathe, exercise, get a massage, read scrolls in the library, or hang out with friends. Sounds like a modern spa, right? Now here's the twist. The floor is warm, literally heated beneath your feet. Welcome to the hypocaust system. Beneath the bathhouses were hollow chambers and ceramic pillars. Slaves tended massive furnaces that pumped hot air under the floors and into the walls. Different rooms had different temperatures. The frigidarium was cold, The tepidarium was warm, and the caldarium was boiling. The Romans used a combination of fire, air channels, and pressure systems to create entire indoor climate zones, without a single wire, motor, or thermostat. But warm baths are just the beginning. The Romans had indoor plumbing, and not just for the rich. Entire cities like Pompeii and Ostia had networks of underground lead pipes, valves, and fountains that distributed water, powered by gravity from massive aqueducts. And this wasn't some crude trickle. The Aqua Marcia, one of Rome's longest aqueducts, carried fresh water from 91 kilometers away, supplying over 1 million cubic meters of water per day to the city. That's more than many modern cities manage. And now, the part that really messes with your idea of the ancient world. Toilets? Public toilets with long marble benches, evenly spaced holes, and running water flowing beneath them to carry waste away. A fresh water channel at the front allowed people to clean sponges used for wiping. Yes, they had toilet hygiene systems. But here's the twist. In wealthy homes and bathhouses, archaeologists have found signs of heated toilet seats. Think about that. While the rest of the world squatted in the woods, Romans were warming their backsides on marble thrones. And what about their sewer system? The Cloaca Maxima was a feat of hydraulic engineering. A massive stone tunnel that drained the entire city into the Tiber River. It still exists. Still works. That means a structure built in the 6th century BCE is still functioning 2,500 years later, while modern systems need replacing after just a few decades. Romans understood water management like few civilizations ever have. But Rome didn't just master comfort, they flirted with automation. And here's where it gets weird. Let's talk about Heron of Alexandria, a Roman-era engineer who lived in the 1st century CE. This man invented devices that should not have existed back then, like a coin-operated vending machine. You drop a coin into a slot, it would land on a lever, the lever tipped, and boom! Out came a precise amount of holy water. Then the coin slid off, and the valve closed. That's a vending machine in the 1st century, but wait, there's more. Heron also built automatic doors. In temples, when the priest lit a fire on the altar, hidden tubes would expand from the heat, causing water to move through a system, triggering weights and pulleys that slowly opened massive temple doors. Worshippers saw the doors opened by divine will, but it was just fluid mechanics and physics. It was engineering disguised as a miracle. And then there's the kicker, robots. Yes, robots. Heron's writings describe automated puppet theaters, powered by gears, ropes, pulleys, and even steam. Miniature figures would move, dance, or reenact mythological scenes, all controlled by pre-programmed mechanical sequences. One of his machines could run a 10-minute show without human input. In effect, Heron created the first programmable machines. Meanwhile, in the Colosseum, the most iconic Roman structure, engineers installed elevators powered by pulleys and counterweights. These lifts brought wild animals and gladiators from the underground chambers up to the arena floor. Picture this. You're sitting in the stands, the floor opens with a deep rumble, and a lion bursts forth from below, hoisted by an ancient machine. There were 24 such elevators operated by teams of men using winches and gears. It was an ancient stage production on a scale we still struggle to replicate. And all of this was supported by an empire that understood infrastructure. Rome had postal systems, fire brigades, street lighting using oil lamps, and even a newspaper, the Acta Diurna, which was carved in stone and displayed in public forums daily. Government announcements, court decisions, even celebrity gossip. Available to all literate citizens. They didn't have the internet, but they had information networks. They had maps, mile markers, and roadside inns for travelers. They had public libraries, medical clinics, and schooling. Doctors used surgical tools that looked disturbingly modern. Scalpels, forceps, bone drills, even speculums. Some surgeries were done with alcohol or opium as anesthetic, and antiseptics like vinegar or honey to clean wounds. This was not a civilization fumbling in the dark. This was a world running on logic, design, and control. The deeper you go, the more one thing becomes clear. Rome wasn't behind us. We're behind Rome. But Rome didn't just build roads, aqueducts, and concrete marvels. It also knew how to entertain millions of people, on a scale and with a brutality that would make even modern spectacles feel tame. Because for all their engineering brilliance, the Romans also had a taste for theatrical excess, and they turned entertainment into a tool of politics, propaganda, and raw spectacle. Let's start with the obvious, the Colosseum. You've seen the ruins, but most people have no idea what this building truly was. It wasn't just a stadium, it was a machine for public emotion. Completed in 80 CE under Emperor Titus, it could seat between 50,000 and 80,000 people. Spectators were arranged by social class, the emperor and senators up close, commoners high above. Entry was free because this was more than entertainment. It was control, bread and circuses, distract the people and you rule the empire. And what went on inside? Not just gladiator fights, the Colosseum hosted choreographed battles, executions, wild animal hunts, reenactments of famous wars, and most shockingly, mock naval battles. That's right. The Romans could flood the entire arena using a system of underground pipes and water tanks, then float small ships inside. They recreated sea battles between Athens and Persia, or pirates versus the Roman Navy. Real water, real ships, real death. And they weren't sloppy about it. These shows were scripted, choreographed, and timed to dramatic effect. Gladiators trained in professional schools like the Ludus Magnus, just behind the Colosseum. They learned not just to fight, but to perform. Some were celebrities. They had fans, endorsements, and nicknames. The crowd decided their fate with gestures. The emperor could grant mercy or give the death signal. It was live reality TV with the highest stakes imaginable. But the Colosseum wasn't the only venue. Rome was dotted with theaters, arenas, and circuses, each built to pull in massive crowds. The Circus Maximus, for example, could seat over 150,000 people. That's almost twice the capacity of the largest modern football stadium. And what did they come to see? Chariot races. Thunderous, blinding, bone-breaking races where teams, red, white, blue, and green, competed not just on the track, but in politics. Fans lived and died by their factions' colors. The chaos was legendary. Crashes, sabotage, bribery, even riots. Races were fast and violent. Chariots made of lightweight wood, pulled by teams of 4 horses, would rocket around the track at breakneck speed, taking 7 laps around the central spine, or spina. Drivers wrapped reins around their wrists for better control, but if they crashed, they could be dragged to death. That's where we get the word circus today, not from clowns, but from bloodsport. But Roman entertainment wasn't all violence. They also had theatrical plays, music festivals, comedy, and even mime. Yes, literal silent actors performing physical comedy. There were poetry readings, oratory competitions, and mock trials where rhetoric students battled it out in front of live audiences. Romans loved a good debate almost as much as they loved a good stabbing. And it went beyond performance. Wealthy Romans threw lavish dinner parties that were events in themselves. Meals that lasted hours with multiple courses, exotic animals on the menu, and musicians, dancers, or even acrobats performing between courses. The food? Flamingo tongues, stuffed dormice, honey-glazed peacock. Served on silver dishes beneath ceilings rigged to drop rose petals and perfumes onto guests. It was less about eating and more about showing power, status, and taste. They even built revolving dining rooms. The Emperor Nero's Domus Aurea, or Golden House, reportedly had a banquet hall that slowly rotated, powered by hidden machinery beneath the floor, so guests could enjoy a constantly shifting view of the gardens and sky, while being serenaded and fed grapes. Yes, it was as over-the-top as it sounds. And here's something that will blow your mind. In seaside cities like Baiae, elite Romans built floating party barges, essentially ancient yachts, with tiled floors, marble columns, and private bathhouses on board. Caligula was said to have an entire floating palace on Lake Nemi, complete with running water and heating systems. We didn't believe it until the 20th century when the ships were excavated and found to contain gears, anchors, and even lead plumbing. Rome partied in style. But beneath all the fun, there was structure. Organization. The games and festivals weren't random. They followed a schedule. Over 170 public holidays per year, many with religious or imperial significance. The state funded entertainment not just for amusement, but for order. Happy citizens are controllable citizens, and no one did that better than the Romans. So the next time you go to a stadium, a concert, a play, or binge watch a series, remember, the Romans built this model. They perfected the formula of emotion, violence, pleasure, and power, and they wrapped it all in stone, bronze, and marble with cheering crowds echoing through time. And just when you think you've seen the full genius of Rome, in their roads, their battles, their games, you start to uncover something even stranger. Because behind the stadiums, behind the gladiators, behind the roaring crowds and marble baths, Rome had scientists, doctors, engineers, astronomers, inventors, men who quietly pushed the boundaries of what was supposed to be possible in their time. Let's talk medicine. In the ruins of Pompeii, archaeologists found surgical kits buried beneath volcanic ash, perfectly preserved. These weren't crude tools. These were fine, precision instruments made of bronze and iron, scalpels, bone saws, forceps, catheters, needles, and even speculums. Modern surgeons could pick them up and use them today with no instruction, and Roman surgeons used them to perform eye surgeries, hernia repairs, dental procedures, and even brain operations like trepanation, cutting a hole in the skull to relieve pressure. Sounds insane, but Roman medical texts describe techniques to keep the patient conscious, to control bleeding, and even use painkillers like opium, mandrake, and wine. But it wasn't just about cutting flesh. Romans understood public health in a way that most medieval societies wouldn't understand for another 1,500 years. Cities like Rome, Carthage, and Ephesus had public hospitals, clean water supply, waste management, and even quarantine zones during outbreaks. They knew disease spread through filth. They didn't know what germs were, but they built systems to stop them anyway. Now imagine this. You're walking in a Roman city, and you see a metal plate on the ground. You lift it up, and below is an entire underground maintenance tunnel, part of a massive system of sewers, storm drains, and inspection corridors. Rome had layered infrastructure. Some cities even had underground storage rooms, refrigerated chambers, and ventilation shafts designed to keep air flowing through homes and baths. Entire subterranean networks for water, heat, and airflow, built without a single modern machine. And above ground, the science goes even further. Take their architectural acoustics. Roman theaters were designed so that a whisper on stage could be heard in the back row, without any amplification. They used curved walls, tiered seating, and resonating bronze jars built into the structure to control sound. Theaters in places like Aspendos and Orange are still used today for concerts. Their math was that exact. Then there's astronomy. Roman scientists built astronomical tools to track the sun, moon, stars, and planets. Sundials weren't just decorative, they were precisely calibrated instruments, adjusted for latitude and season. Pliny the Elder wrote about eclipses, comets, and solar cycles, and Roman calendars incorporated leap years long before most of the world did. Their engineers aligned temples with solar events, so that once a year a beam of sunlight would strike the altar at the exact moment of a sacred festival. That's not faith, that's cosmic engineering. And then there's Vitruvius, a Roman architect, engineer, and military planner who lived in the 1st century BCE. Vitruvius wrote a 10-volume guide to architecture that included everything from city planning to water pressure systems to how music affects the human soul. He described how to build machines to raise water, to crush grain, to move entire columns into place. He wrote about wind energy, mechanical cranes, pulleys, gears, and balance systems. He even detailed the ideal proportions of the human body, centuries before Leonardo da Vinci drew the Vitruvian Man. In fact, da Vinci based his sketch on Vitruvius' descriptions, 1,400 years after it was written. And yet, even with all this brilliance, some things still confuse modern historians. Like the Pantheon's dome, a perfect unreinforced concrete hemisphere 43 meters across with an open oculus in the center. No one really knows how they poured it so evenly, how they calculated the weight, how it hasn't collapsed. Or the precise cut of the Roman aqueducts, with slopes of 0.1% sustained over dozens of kilometers, through mountains, across valleys, underground, and over massive bridges. Without pumps, without lasers, just math, just manpower, just mastery. And then there's the deep time effect, because Roman ideas didn't die with Rome. After the empire fell, most of this knowledge disappeared for over 1,000 years. Aqueducts fell silent. Concrete was forgotten. Surgery regressed. Roads crumbled. Europe plunged into darkness and stayed there. It wasn't until the Renaissance that people dusted off old Roman texts and realized, we didn't invent this stuff, we just forgot it. Rome didn't just shape its own world, it shaped ours. Every time you walk into a stadium, flush a toilet, cross a paved road, lift a heavy object with a pulley, get surgery, pay with coins, read a calendar, or open a tap, you're living in the echo of an empire that refused to be primitive. And here's the part that hits hardest. Rome fell. But not because its science failed. Not because its buildings collapsed. Not because its people forgot how to engineer or fight or govern. Rome fell because the world around it broke. Because ambition turned to corruption. Because emperors turned paranoid. Because the machine they built became too big to hold together. Imagine this. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched from Scotland to Syria. Over 75 million people. Dozens of languages, religions, climates, currencies. To manage it, they built an invisible web of roads, laws, treaties, borders, taxes, and force. It worked for centuries. And then slowly, it didn't. They had the tech. But they lost the unity. They had the roads, but stopped maintaining them. They had the armies. But the soldiers weren't Roman anymore. They were mercenaries, paid, disposable, and they had emperors who no longer cared about science or city planning or clean water. They cared about power and how to keep it. In 410 CE, the unthinkable happened. The Visigoths sacked Rome, a city that hadn't been breached by a foreign enemy in 800 years. People who once watched lions leap from trapdoors in the Colosseum now watch their temples burn. The eternal city fell silent. But here's the twist no one talks about. Rome didn't really die. It fragmented. It mutated. It infected everything. Roman law became the foundation of European legal systems. Roman engineering principles shaped the cathedrals of the Middle Ages. Roman roads still lie beneath highways. Roman aqueducts still feed modern cities. Roman coins are still dug up in London, Paris, and Tunis. And the Latin language? It never died. It just evolved into French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. Even the US Senate, its name, its structure, its rituals, is Roman in design. You've heard the phrase, all roads lead to Rome. But that's not a metaphor, that was literal. Roman engineers marked distances from a central golden milestone in the Forum, and every road in every direction eventually pointed back to the heart of the empire. And in a way, they still do, because the ghost of Rome is everywhere. In our buildings, our governments, our cities, our architecture, our habits. It's in every airport with numbered terminals, every arena with tiered seating, every calendar, every map, every courthouse with columns. We didn't build on top of ancient Rome. We're living inside it. And maybe that's the real legacy, that a civilization could rise from mud huts on the Tiber River, build aqueducts and domes and machines and systems so advanced that even after it collapses, its fingerprints never fade. That 2,000 years later, you can still drink from its fountains, walk its roads, sit in its stadiums, and read its thoughts etched into stone. That long after the emperors turned to dust, and the marble cracked, and the last eagle standard fell to the ground. Rome kept whispering to the future. And we're still listening. You've heard the grand story. The aqueducts, the Colosseum, the legions marching on perfect roads. But behind the marble and the myths, Rome had a strange and brilliant underbelly. One that schools don't talk about, and history books tend to skip. Because the truth is, Rome wasn't just organized and powerful, it was also wildly experimental, ingenious, sometimes absurd, and often way ahead of its time. Take Roman concrete again, for example. Yes, it was durable, but there's something even crazier. They made self-healing concrete. Modern researchers discovered that when cracks form in Roman cement, water seeps in and triggers a chemical reaction with volcanic ash and lime, creating new minerals that literally seal the damage from within. In other words, their buildings could repair themselves. Then there's Roman glassblowing, a technology that only showed up around the 1st century BCE. Within decades, Romans turned it into an art and an industry. They made window glass, colored bowls, perfume bottles, even magnifying lenses. Pliny the Elder described how globes of glass could concentrate sunlight to ignite fire. Essentially, they had primitive solar energy, but even more bizarre was how they played with luxury and illusion. In Emperor Nero's palace, engineers installed ceiling panels that rotated and showered guests with rose petals. One historical account even claims that so many petals once fell during a banquet that a guest suffocated beneath them. Whether that's true or not, the fact remains. Roman banquets were theatrical engineering displays where the wealthy competed to outdo each other with hydraulics, scent pumps, and automated entertainment. Speaking of automation, remember Heron of Alexandria? The man who invented coin-operated vending machines and theatrical robots? He also created a primitive steam engine. It was called the Eolipile, a metal sphere mounted on a pivot with 2 bent pipes on either side. When steam was fed into it, the pressure made the sphere spin. It didn't drive machines, but it proved that steam could produce motion. A toy, yes, but one that predicted the entire Industrial Revolution, 1,600 years before it happened. Now let's get personal. Romans didn't just build cities, they designed how people lived, right down to appliances, routines, and privacy. In Pompeii and Herculaneum, archaeologists uncovered ancient shops and bars frozen in time. Some had takeout counters carved in stone, with circular holes to hold hot pots. These were fast food joints, thermopolia, used daily by workers and travelers. There were menus, recipes, waiters. They even had graffiti reviews etched into the walls like an ancient Yelp. And it gets weirder. In bathhouses, we find evidence of locker systems where people stored clothes. In homes, hidden staircases were built for slaves to move silently without being seen. Wealthy villas had underfloor heating, skylights, fountains, and even rotating dining couches so guests didn't have to turn their heads. They understood comfort as design, centuries before modern ergonomics. There's also the dark brilliance of Roman military signaling. Long before the telegraph, Romans used heliographs, mirrors reflecting sunlight and patterns, to flash messages between towers over vast distances. They even had a system of hydraulic semaphore where 2 identical containers of water were drained at the same rate. When a signal was sent, the operator pulled a valve and both containers dropped, with a floating pole indicating a message encoded by height. It was complicated, but it worked. Instant long-distance communication. In the 1st century BCE, and in their obsession with time, Romans built water clocks, sundials, and mechanical calendars. The massive horologium of Augustus used the shadow of an Egyptian obelisk to tell the hour by the sun. In large cities, timekeeping was public, architectural, and political. The state literally controlled the sun, or at least the schedule people believed it followed. All of this wasn't random. It was built on a mindset that nature could be controlled, systems could be engineered, and daily life could be optimized. Rome wasn't about inventing magic. It was about taking what already existed — fire, wind, water, pressure, light and turning it into tools, machines, experiences. We look back at them and call it history. But if they looked forward at us, they'd call it familiar. Because their world wasn't just ancient, it was uncannily modern. We've walked the roads. We've seen the aqueducts, the concrete, the machines, the maps, the domes. And by now it's clear, the Romans built a civilization that didn't just conquer the world, it explained it, engineered it, shaped it. But what no one ever prepares you for is how much of it was forgotten. Because as the empire fractured and the legions stopped marching and the stone quarries fell silent, 1,000 years of knowledge began to vanish. Slowly, then suddenly. And some of the greatest feats ever achieved by human hands disappeared beneath vines, soil, and legend. Let's talk about Roman water power. We think of the Industrial Revolution as the beginning of machine-driven labor. But the Romans were already using water wheels to grind grain, power saws, and move heavy loads. At Barbagal in southern Gaul, archaeologists uncovered what might be the first industrial complex in history. 16 water wheels, arranged in a cascading system, powering mills that could feed an entire city. It was a factory, hidden in the hills, 1,800 years before we coined the term. There were hydraulic mines too, where entire hillsides were collapsed using pressurized water, then sifted for gold using sluices and mercury. The scale of this was staggering. One site in Spain, Las Medulas, was literally hollowed out by Roman mining. The mountain was sacrificed, reshaped, washed away for metal. Not by magic, not by guesswork, by design. And then there were the ports, the beating heart of Roman trade. At Portus, near the mouth of the Tiber River, Romans built an artificial harbor with 2 massive basins, protected by a curved breakwater, lighthouses, and a hexagonal dock system. It could host hundreds of ships, and was connected to Rome by a canal system and storage warehouses with multi-story cranes. They even invented a type of maritime cement that hardened underwater, letting them build docks that still survive in the Mediterranean today. But even more surreal was their ability to scale these ideas into megastructures. In the city of Leptis Magna, on the coast of modern-day Libya, the Romans built an entire urban grid, complete with a massive basilica, baths, forum, theater, harbor, and colonnaded streets. All from stone, lifted without electricity, shaped without steel. It's so well preserved that you can still walk the sidewalks, run your hand along the grooves worn by chariot wheels, and feel the outline of a city frozen in time. A Roman city, in the desert. And yet, almost no one sees it. Why? Because after Rome collapsed, the knowledge to maintain, to build, and even to read its systems was lost. Concrete was forgotten. For 1,000 years, no one in Europe knew how to make it. Surgical tools disappeared. Urban sanitation vanished. Engineers in the Middle Ages stared at Roman domes and bridges and said, "We don't know how they did this." Even something as simple as the Archimedes screw, a spiral pump used to move water uphill, was rediscovered in the 16th century. But the Romans had used it centuries earlier in fields, docks, and even inside mines. The fall of Rome wasn't just the end of an empire, it was a rupture. A break in human continuity. A moment when the lights dimmed and generations wandered through ruins, not knowing what they were walking on. And perhaps that's the real tragedy. Not that Rome fell, but that it built a future. And we lost the blueprint. Because buried beneath the soil of modern cities, at the bottoms of harbors, under layers of ash and dirt, there are still machines, buildings, inventions waiting to be understood. Not all of Rome is gone. Some of it is just sleeping. And maybe the more we uncover, the more we realize Rome wasn't ancient. It was just early.